Hail, Shardwalkers. In the grim darkness of the far future, we gather to witness a tale of unwavering faith and martyrdom. The battle lines are drawn. The Sisters Repentia will be tested by fire and devotion. In this saga, a penitent sister and a devout priest shall bear witness to the unimaginable. Before we embark, know that your engagement fuels the crusade. Mark this chronicle with your approval, enlist by subscribing, and strike the bell of notification so you shall not miss the next saga. Now steel your hearts, for Eurytion is already calling. Darkness shrouded the war-torn chapel, broken arches framing a bleeding sunset. Candles flickered in alcoves where once proud saints had stood. Now their statues lay in rubble. Beneath a cracked vault painted with faded imperial iconography, a lone Sister Repentia knelt in prayer. Her hands, calloused and scarred, clutched the hilt of an enormous chainsword grounded before her like a cross. Dried blood flecked her shorn scalp, and parchment strips inscribed with litanies dangled from her tattered robes. In the silence, her whispered devotions mingled with the distant thunder of artillery. "I tread the path of righteousness," she murmured, voice raw yet fervent. "Though it be paved with broken glass, I will walk it barefoot. Though it cross rivers of fire, I will pass over them. Though it wanders wide, the light of the Emperor guides my step." Each word quivered with zealous intensity. The mantra steadied her trembling breaths. Tomorrow, she knew, would likely be the day of her death, a death she craved as atonement and deliverance. Footfalls echoed in the ruined nave. The sister did not stir until she felt a presence halt behind her. "You pray for forgiveness, child," a deep voice asked softly. She recognized the voice of the Thorian priest who traveled with the Crusade's holy retinue. Even without seeing him, she could envision his austere, lined face and the weight of decades of faith etched into it. The brass aquila hanging from his neck reflected the candlelight as he stepped forward. The Repentia bowed her head lower. "I pray for the Emperor's grace, Padre," she replied, using a title of respect for the priest. Her voice carried quiet desperation, "and for the strength to do his will tomorrow, to die clean of my sins." The priest came alongside her and made the sign of the aquila over her bent form. Shattered stained glass fragments crunched under his boots. "O Emperor, deliver us from doubt," he intoned, as if reciting a litany. His voice was low and sepulchral, echoing in the desolate chapel. "From the blasphemy of the fallen." "Our Emperor, deliver us," she answered automatically, her throat tightening. She could taste fear at the back of her tongue despite her faith. The eve of battle always brought that human, clawing dread, even to one who longed for martyrdom. The priest's weathered hand gently touched her shoulder. "From the heresy of the schismatic," he continued, "our Emperor, deliver us." Her response was a hiss through clenched teeth. Visions of the foe flashed in her mind. Traitors and secessionists, their once noble banners defiled, their eyes gleaming with malice. How many of her sisters had fallen to their guns and blades in this protracted war? How many more would die at dawn's light? The priest circled to face her, robes whispering over the dust. His features were illuminated now. A hawk-like nose, eyes fever-bright with conviction, the shaved scalp of an ecclesiarchy confessor. He extended a hand. "Rise, daughter of the Emperor." She obeyed, levering herself up with the hefty chainsword. Standing, the Repentia was lithe but strong, her young face hardened by trials, yet still bearing the haunted look of guilt unredeemed. She kept her eyes lowered out of respect. The priest towered a head above her, a gaunt yet imposing figure in his frayed black cassock. A censer dangled at his side, faint incense smoke curling around them, mixing with the scent of dust and dried blood. You seek to die tomorrow, he said quietly, searching her face. It was not a question. All Sisters Repentia sought death in battle as penance, but there was something gentle in his tone, as if he saw beyond her ferocity to the trembling soul beneath. Do not fear it. Embrace it as your absolution. Know that in offering your life, you affirm your faith. The sister swallowed hard. I have prayed for this chance, to atone in his eyes, to wash away my failures with my blood. Her voice cracked, choked by a mix of shame and hope. Shame flickered in her eyes for a sin she did not name. Only through death could she atone. The priest nodded, grim understanding on his face. He had heard the confessions of countless penitent warriors. The God Emperor knows the sincerity of your remorse. He also knows the value of your sacrifice. He paused, then added in a lower voice, should it be his will, he may yet work miracles through even the lowliest of his servants. Remember that, child. At this, the Repentia dared to lift her gaze. In the dim light, the priest's eyes glinted with something. Was it fervor or prophecy? Her heart quickened. Miracles, she echoed. Unbidden, an image came to her mind. A blazing figure wreathed in light striding through fire and ruin. An angelic silhouette she had seen earlier that day in the distance. Sister Celestine, leading a prayer at the forward camp. The living symbol of zeal among their ranks. The priest must have caught the flicker of recognition in her eyes. His lips curved in a slight smile. Yes, he said. Miracles. Have you not felt it? The Emperor's hand at work in this crusade. He turned, gesturing through the broken doorway of the chapel toward the blood-streaked sky. In the distance, beyond the razor wire and trenches, the horizon was aglow with the fires of war. We stand at the brink of a holy victory. Tomorrow, when the first wave breaches the enemy's defenses, the Emperor's judgment will be upon those heretics. And I believe we will witness his divine intervention. The Sister Repentia's breath caught. She had felt something, a stirring in her soul during the last litany recited at sunset by the gathered sororitas. A whisper in her heart that their salvation was at hand. Many of the faithful were speaking in hushed tones of Sister Celestine's almost superhuman courage in these past weeks of stalemate on Eurytion. Some even dared to suggest she was a vessel of the Emperor's wrath. The Repentia did not know if that were true, but she had seen Celestine fight. How the woman moved through gunfire unscathed. How the air itself seemed to shimmer with holy light when she raised her voice in prayer. It was enough to make one believe in miracles. I will serve his will, whatever may come, the Repentia said, voice steeled now. If the Emperor sees fit to grant us a miracle, I will meet it with open eyes. She thumped her breast with her fist in the traditional vow. My life is the Emperor's coin to spend. Ave Imperator, the priest responded, his smile sharpening into zeal. May you spend it dearly, daughter. Every drop of blood, every aching step tomorrow, let it glorify him. He pulled a small vial of sacred oil from within his robes, and with a reverent murmur, anointed the Repentia's forehead. The oil was cool against the grime of her skin. In nomine Imperator, go with his blessing, and know that martyrdom in his service is not an end, but a beginning. The Sister Repentia bowed, a single tear escaping down her cheek. Whether from relief, gratitude, or the overwhelming mixture of fear and fervor in her chest, she could not say. Thank you, Father, she whispered. The old priest's hand lingered a moment on her shaved head, a benediction. In that moment, she felt a warmth, a curious solace, radiating from his touch. Or perhaps it was only her imagination. He too had closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayer for her soul. Thunder boomed in the distance as enemy artillery probed the dusk, and the ground beneath the chapel trembled faintly. The priest opened his eyes and gazed toward the front. "Go now. Rest if you can. Tomorrow will come swiftly." He stepped back, his features once more stern and inscrutable in the half-light. "We both have duties to attend before dawn. I must hearten the others. And you, prepare yourself for the Emperor's judgment." "I shall, Father." She hefted her eviscerator chainsword onto her shoulder. The massive toothed blade gleamed dully in the candlelight as she turned to leave. Her heart was still heavy with the burden of what lay ahead, but the priest's blessing had kindled a spark of courage within her. As she reached the shattered doorway, the Repentia paused. Over her shoulder, she cast one last glance at the Thorian priest. He stood before the cracked altar, head bowed in his own contemplation now, the fading light painting him in bloody hues. A frail, solitary figure, and yet unyielding as steel in his faith. In that instant, she realized she did not even know his name, nor he hers. In the grand drama of war, they were but two anonymous faithful among millions. Still, in this ruined holy place on the eve of battle, they shared a sacred purpose. "Tomorrow," she said softly, her voice carrying across the silence, "I will not falter." The priest looked up, meeting her eyes. There was a terrible compassion there. "The Emperor is with you," he answered. "Go in faith, child. Perhaps we shall meet again in the glory of his light." With that benediction echoing in her soul, the Sister Repentia stepped out into the war-torn dusk. The last rays of the dying sun haloed her scarred silhouette as she marched toward the encampment. In her chest, her heart thudded a battle prayer in time with her footsteps. "Love the Emperor, for he is the salvation of mankind. Tremble before his majesty, for we all walk in his immortal shadow." Morning's first light filtered weakly through a pall of gunsmoke and dust. The Sister Repentia stood at the forefront of the Imperial lines, her feet sunk in the churned mud of a trench. Around her, dozens of other repentant sisters waited in grim silence. Their breaths misted in the chill dawn air, and their chainswords and eviscerators rumbled idly as they tested the triggers. Ahead, across a blasted expanse of no man's land, loomed the capital city of Eurytion. Once it must have been majestic, a bastion of imperial civilization on this frontier world. Now its spires were shattered and blackened. The city's great gates stood warped but unbroken, wreathed in coils of barbed wire and the hulks of burnt-out tanks. From the high ramparts, enemy heavy bolters and autocannons jutted like the fangs of some slumbering beast. Even now, muzzle flashes winked along the battlements, trading sporadic fire with the besieging Imperial Guard artillery behind the sisters' position. The Repentia flexed her fingers around the grip of her eviscerator. Dried blood from prior battles cracked on her fingers. Her heart was thudding a relentless prayer inside her chest. She cast a sideways glance to her fellow penitent warriors. They were a tragic, fearsome sight. Hair shorn or hanging in ragged locks, stripped of power armor in penance. Some had purity seals and scrawled prayers affixed directly to their scarred skin with wax and ink. All bore the haunted, hollow-eyed look of those already half dead, seeking redemption in the only absolution left to them: glorious death in battle. Standing atop the firing step just behind the Repentia was Sister Superior Magdala, the mistress of repentance. Her gaunt frame was swathed in a crimson cloak, a barbed lash coiled at her side. Magdala's voice cut through the morning gloom as she paced before her charges. "Daughters of the Emperor," she called, equal parts sorrow and steel in her tone. "Today you redeem yourselves in his sight. Today you shall wash away your transgressions in the blood of heretics." A low chorus of fervent moans and whispered amens answered her. The Repentia bowed her head, and pressed her lips to the parchment strip nailed to her eviscerator's casing. A prayer of contrition scrawled there. "Emperor, grant me the strength to atone." Mistress Medela cracked her neural whip with a sharp retort. "Know that you are already dead," she snarled, eyes blazing under her hood. "Accept it. Only then can you serve his will without hesitation." She stalked along the line of kneeling penitents, tapping the lash against the pauldrons of armored sisters in the next trench who would follow after. "You are the tip of his spear. You will strike where it hurts the foe most. No armor of faith, no burden of sin to slow your strike. You will tear the heart from these faithless traitors or die in the attempt, and the God Emperor will welcome your souls." The Repentia felt a calm settle over her at those words. Already dead. Yes. In her mind, she had died the day she donned the black robes of penitence. Whatever life she had beyond this battle would be undeserved grace. Clutching her holy weapon, she mouthed a final litany under her breath. In life, shame. In death, absolution. A stirring at the trench ladder drew her attention. Sister Celestine had stepped forward. The Repentia's breath caught at the sight of her. Celestine was a Sister Repentia like themselves, clad in a simple torn surplice, her arms bare and crisscrossed with scars. Like all of them, she had shed her old rank and name for atonement's sake. Yet there was an undeniable aura about this woman that set her apart. Even streaked with soot and dried gore from previous assaults, Celestine seemed to almost glow with an inner light. She turned to face the assembled penitent sisters and raised a hand that held a simple iron blade, a standard-issue chainsword, its motor purring steadily. Her face, smeared with ash, bore an expression of fierce serenity. Deep-set eyes smoldered with purpose in the dawn's half-light. When she spoke, her voice rang clear, cutting through the distant artillery thumps and the groan of wounded in the rear lines.
"Sisters!"
Celestine said, and though she did not shout, every nearby soldier fell quiet to listen.
"The moment of expiation is upon us. For months we have bled to break this heretic rebellion. Today, by the grace of the throne, we will break it."
She swept her gaze over them, and the Repentia felt as though those eyes lingered on hers, a heartbeat longer than the rest, filling her with warmth.
"We are already dead,"
Celestine continued, echoing the mistress's creed.
"and so we have no fear. No pain will stay our hand. No horror will make us shrink. We go to meet our Emperor with the fire of faith burning in our hearts."
A tremor of emotion passed through the gathered sisters. Some sobbed openly in rapture at her words. Others gripped their weapons tighter and growled assent. The Repentia closed her eyes, drinking in Celestine's words like cool water on parched lips. Her fear was there, yes, but it was being transformed, alchemized into zeal. She felt a righteous heat spread in her chest. Celestine held out her arms, as if to embrace them all, the faint light glimmering around her head almost like a halo.
"My sisters, my beloved sisters, let us prove worthy of the Emperor's mercy. We shall buy the Imperium's victory with our lives gladly given, and if any of us falter..."
Her tone hardened.
"If any voice inside whispers that you are not strong enough, remember that the God Emperor watches, he watches, and through our sacrifice he shall act."
The Repentia felt tears stinging her eyes. She had never heard Celestine speak at such length. The woman usually fought with silence and determination. This morning, though, something flowed through her words, a conviction that bordered on prophecy. Through our sacrifice, he shall act. The concept clanged like a bell in the sister's mind, resonating with what the Thorian priest had hinted at the night before: divine intervention. A sudden crack echoed overhead. Enemy mortar. The shell howled and crashed far to their right, sending up a plume of dirt and body parts where a squad huddled behind a Chimera transport. The blast wave rippled across the trench, spattering the sisters with mud. None of them flinched. They were long inured to such horrors. But it served as a brutal reminder. Time was short. Mistress Magdala snarled, "Positions! Stand ready!" She licked her lips with feral anticipation and unfurled her neural whip fully, the coils sparking. Along the line, Sisters Repentia rose from their knees and assumed their places on the trench's fire step, muscles coiled to spring. The Repentia planted one foot on the bottom rung of the ladder that would carry her up and over the parapet. Her hands tightened around her eviscerator's hilt until her knuckles went white beneath the gore and dust caked on her skin. Celestine moved to the center, directly below a tattered banner of the Order of Our Martyred Lady that hung limply from a bent pole. Behind her, standard battle sisters of that order, clad in black power armor with red robes, stood in supporting ranks. They would surge after the Repentia had cleared a breach, if a breach was made. The Repentia thought she heard a few of those armored sisters murmuring prayers for the souls of the doomed vanguard. The horizon grew brighter as the sun struggled to pierce the haze. Out on the field, shapes of barbed wire entanglements and minefield warning stakes gradually sharpened into view. The enemy positions remained ominously silent, aside from the occasional crack of a sharpshooter's rifle or the distant clatter of tracked vehicles repositioning behind the walls. The calm before the storm. The Repentia drew in a deep lungful of the cold, smoke-tinged air. She made the sign of the Aquila across her chest. "Emperor, accept my soul." Every nerve in her body felt taut as a drawn bowstring. The weight of impending violence pressed on her, yet beneath it was a strange lightness. She imagined that perhaps this was what a soul felt like at the moment it slipped its mortal coil. A certain weightless clarity, a singular focus on the moment. A shrill whistle blast suddenly cut through the air, the signal to attack. "For the Emperor!" Mistress Magdala roared, her arm thrusting forward.
For the Emperor!
The Sisters Repentia screamed as one, voices ragged with fury and ecstasy. The Repentia surged upward, scrambling up the trench ladder into the open. At her side, Celestine was already up and over, moving with a lithe grace that seemed almost superhuman as she vaulted the parapet and charged forward. The world exploded into noise. Heavy stubber rounds tore the air apart, and the crack of lass fire lanced from the city walls. The Repentia sprinted after Celestine, her bare feet pounding the corpse-strewn earth. She let loose a raw, wordless battle cry that tore at her throat. The charge of the repentant had begun. In that instant, fear vanished. Pain meant nothing. All the Sister Repentia knew was the thunder of her heart, the roar of her chainsword revving to full throttle, and the shining figure of Celestine a few strides ahead, leading them into the jaws of hell with the promise of salvation on the other side. The Thorian priest stood with one foot on the tread of a trench wall, peering through a battered pair of field binoculars. He had taken up position on a slight rise behind the front lines, where coils of communications cables and a Vox unit marked the Crusade's forward command post. All around him swarmed activity, officers barking into Vox mics, medici personnel laying out stretchers in grim anticipation, soldiers saying final prayers or checking weapons with shaking hands. The priest's long black cassock fluttered in the chill breeze that carried the stench of promethium and death from the battlefield. "Holy Emperor, guide them," he whispered, gaze fixed on the distant form of Celestine and the cluster of Repentia now scrambling out of their trench. Through the magnified lenses, he saw Celestine brandish her chainsword high leading the charge like a heroine out of ancient scripture. Even at this distance, with the morning sun barely breaking through haze, he fancied he could see a nimbus of light around her. Perhaps a mere trick of dawn's rays on the dust, but perhaps something more. Beside him, Lord Militant Ansgar, master of the Palatine Crusade, lowered the rangefinder he'd been using. His scarred, chisel-jawed face was set in a scowl. "There they go," Ansgar muttered, almost begrudgingly. Martyrs to soften the enemy for the real assault. He was a pragmatic, hard-bitten man of the Imperial Guard, with little patience for what he deemed the ecclesiarchy's costly zealotry. Yet even he watched Celestine's receding form with a touch of unease. The priest made the sign of the Aquila and offered no rebuke to Ansgar's tone. Instead he intoned, "Emperor, grant them the strength to smite the heretic. Grant them purity of purpose." His voice trembled slightly. With cold or with fervor, it was hard to tell. He could feel his pulse quickening as the battle's tempo rose. On the walls of Eurytion ahead, alarms began to wail, and the enemy's guns awakened in full fury. Muzzle flashes flickered like angry fireflies along the ramparts, and a hail of tracer fire arced out toward the charging Sisters Repentia. The priest's stomach tightened. They were still so far from the city. Crossing that open killing ground under heavy fire was nigh suicidal. But that was the point, wasn't it? The penitents would draw the worst of the enemy's wrath, perhaps even create a breach or destroy a key emplacement before they fell. "Damn brave lasses," grunted an adjutant nearby as he watched the Repentia hurl themselves forward. The priest heard a note of pity in the soldier's voice. "They are absolving us all with their courage," the priest replied softly. His gloved fingers tightened around the rosarius at his neck. Though he had steeled himself for this, the sight was still harrowing. Dozens of fragile human figures sprinting under a storm of shells and lass beams, vanishing into the smoke one by one. Each one a candle snuffed out, each one a prayer answered through sacrifice. He forced himself to maintain focus on Celestine's figure through the binoculars. Unlike the others, she was still visible, darting aside as an explosion geysered dirt at her heels, then reappearing wreathed in dust. She moved like a dancer through the carnage. He watched in astonishment as Celestine bounded atop a chunk of fallen masonry halfway to the walls and swung her humming chainsword to deflect a stream of incoming fire. Sparks flew where she parried the tracer rounds with impossible speed. A superstitious thrill crawled up the priest's spine. Emperor, protect her. Is it true? Many in the Crusade forces had whispered that Celestine was unlike any ordinary sister. Rumor held that in previous skirmishes, she had walked away from wounds that would have killed a space marine, that her spilled blood formed the shape of the aquila on the ground, that enemy bullets seemed to veer aside at the last moment. The priest, in his heart, wanted to believe these tales were signs of the Emperor's favor, not mere fanciful exaggerations born of desperation. Beside him, Lord Ansgar spat a stream of low smoke and turned to bark orders into the Vox network. Mortar teams 3 and 4. Lay suppressive fire on the outer trenches now. Clear a path for the Repentia. Heavy weapons. Target enemy gun nests at grid 22. 19. Keep them pinned, Emperor, dammit. His voice was gruff but not unkind. He was doing what he could to help the doomed vanguard. The ground shook as Imperial Earthshaker cannons responded, sending shells screaming overhead toward the city. Seconds later, plumes of stone and fire erupted along Eurytion's battlements. One section of wall disappeared in a cloud of debris. The priest allowed himself a thin smile of grim satisfaction. Thou wouldst bring them only death. We beseech thee, destroy them. The ancient litany coursed through his thoughts. A panicked cry crackled over a nearby Vox speaker. Serpent actual to command. We're under heavy fire. It degenerated into static and screams. The priest closed his eyes a brief moment, lips moving in prayer for those souls lost in that instant. When he opened them again, his binocular view settled on a specific point along the enemy ramparts. A tall platform, draped in tattered remnants of imperial banners, now defaced with heretical symbols. A cluster of robed figures were gathered there, likely the heretic leadership or their profane clergy. Even as the thought crossed his mind, a volley of rockets whooshed from behind the imperial lines, shrieking towards that platform. The structure erupted in flame. One rocket detonated directly against it, and the priest glimpsed a red-robed body flail amid the fireball and tumble out of sight. He allowed himself a brief exultation. Emperor's justice. But when the smoke cleared, shapes were still moving there. Through the haze, he couldn't tell if the apostate cardinal who led the rebellion yet lived, or if it was his acolytes swarming. No time to dwell on it. The battle raged on chaotically. The Repentia had nearly reached the foot of the walls now, or at least those who yet lived. The priest scanned frantically for Celestine again. He found her at the base of the gatehouse, locked in ferocious combat atop a pile of rubble from a partial breach. Celestine was a white flame blur amid the drab melee, her chainsword rising and falling as she cut down foes with every sweep. Gunfire rained around her. 2 Repentia at her side were cut down by a scything heavy stubber burst, but Celestine pressed on unfazed. The priest watched in awe as she lunged and plunged her chainsword into an enemy gunner's chest, then ripped it free in a torrent of blood. A cheer went up from some of the imperial trenches behind him, as observers saw what he saw. Celestine reaching the enemy's fortifications. "She's done it! She's on the wall!" someone cried out. Indeed, Celestine had begun to climb a ladder of wreckage and broken rebar leading onto a lower rampart. Other Repentia followed her, screaming praise to the Emperor, even as they were picked off one after another. Celestine herself took a glancing hit from a lass bolt on her left arm. The priest saw her stagger momentarily. His heart clenched. But a moment later, Celestine straightened, the wound seemingly disregarded, and hurled a frag grenade with her offhand toward a cluster of defenders rushing her. The explosion that followed sent bodies and limbs cartwheeling off the rampart. "God, Emperor," the priest breathed, hardly aware he spoke aloud. "She fights like one of the Primarchs of old." He could sense it now, a palpable energy radiating from the battle's focal point at the gate. The air around Celestine almost seemed to shimmer in the particulate-choked morning. Whether it was a true halo of the divine or his own wishful imagination, the priest did not know. But a wild, exhilarating hope surged within him. All about him, the command post buzzed with frenzied updates. First wave at the wall, casualties heavy, breach not yet secured. Voices overlapped in confusion. Lord Ansgar grabbed the vox horn from an operator. "Push the damned second wave forward. Now, support the Repentia at the breach," he barked, spittle flying. Then he slammed the horn back and shouted to one of his aides, "Get the Ogren squads and the Sororitas Celestians up there on the double." As the aide scrambled to convey the order, the Thorian priest looked once more to the front. The second wave. Sisters of Battle in power armor, alongside burly Ogren shock troops and veteran guardsmen, was already clambering out of trenches, advancing under covering fire. If the Repentia had cracked the door, these forces would pry it open. The priest's heart, however, remained with that first wave. He could no longer see the bulk of them in the smoke and carnage by the gatehouse. Only Celestine's approximate position was marked by the intermittent flare of her chainsword amid the dark melee. The enemy was swarming her now. He glimpsed a brute in spiked flak armor, swinging a flail at the sister, only to be cleaved from shoulder to hip by her answering strike. But even Celestine could not be everywhere at once. Other Repentia, equally unshielded and unarmored, were falling to crossfire and sabers as they pressed through the breach. The priest clenched his jaw until it ached. His prayers became a fevered whisper. "Emperor, sustain her. Let not your light falter here." A cold dread coiled in his belly despite his faith. Celestine was beyond remarkable, yes, but she was still mortal. And mortality has a cruel habit of reasserting itself on battlefields such as this. A sharp keening sound rose above the general din, a strange, ululating war cry. The priest turned his binoculars toward its source and felt a chill. From a side postern of the gatehouse, a tide of frenzied cultists poured forth. They were half-naked, smeared in ash and blood, wielding rusty axes and pistols, driven into a berserk fury. Leading them was a hulking figure clad in crude plate armor, his face hidden behind a grotesque horned helm. He bellowed in a dark baritone that carried over the clash, "Blood for the true gods! Tear the witches apart!" The berserk horde crashed into Celestine's position. The Repentia and their mistress Magdala met them head-on in a storm of chain-blade teeth and spattering gore. The priest saw Mistress Magdala lash her neural whip into a cultist's face, melting eyes and brain with a surge of painful current, before she herself was impaled by a screaming woman wielding a sharpened pipe. Magdala collapsed, trampled under the cultist's feet. Then a monstrous champion in the horned helmet barreled straight towards Celestine, swinging a two-handed chain axe. She pivoted to parry, and for a moment they struggled, the whirring teeth of their weapons grinding against each other. Sparks flew in a halo around them. The brute roared some profane oath and kicked Celestine savagely in the abdomen, knocking her back off the rubble pile. The priest's breath caught as Celestine disappeared from his sight, swallowed by the throng of bodies. He lowered the binoculars, an involuntary prayer escaping him. "No, please, throne, no." Every fiber of his being willed Celestine to rise again, to emerge triumphant from that scrum. All along the line, the momentum seemed to waver, as if the entire battlefield held its breath. Seconds ticked by. It was impossible to see clearly what was happening in that seething mass at the gate's foot now. Gunfire and the clangor of melee still resounded, but the priest could not discern Celestine among the shifting silhouettes. The second wave was rushing closer, a Lehman Russ tank plowing through craters to lend its cannon to the assault, yet time itself felt slowed to the priest's perception. He realized his hands were shaking. Tightening them into fists, he turned to the makeshift shrine set up behind the command post's sandbags. There, a gilded Aquila and a weather-beaten lectern held a copy of the Lex Imperialis. He fell to one knee before it, heedless of the curious stares of a few troopers nearby. "El Emperor, absolve us of our weakness," he stammered, voice cracking. He shut his eyes and pressed his forehead to the cold steel of the Aquila. In his mind, he saw again the fearless radiance of Celestine leading the charge, and then the moment she was struck down, if indeed she had been. For the first time, a sliver of doubt pricked his heart. Had the Emperor abandoned them after all? Was this to be another bloody stalemate, another massacre with no miracle to show? No. He crushed that doubt ruthlessly. I am a believer. I must be. Gritting his teeth, the priest resumed his feet and snatched up his binoculars once more with renewed determination. He would witness every moment, bitter or blessed. Scanning the gatehouse and breach, he sought any sign of Celestine's fate. Instead, what met his gaze was a sudden column of fire erupting within the gateway. The Lehman Russ had fired its demolisher cannon at near point-blank range. The ground quaked with the blast, and a portion of the city gate crumbled inwards. The priest flinched, unable to see anyone in that blinding flare. When the smoke billowed out, his heart leapt. Emerging from that haze was a figure, stumbling, bloodied, but unmistakably clad in the tattered garment of the Repentia. Celestine. The priest let out a cry of relief. She yet lived. He watched in amazement as she dragged herself to her feet atop a heap of shattered masonry. Her chainsword was gone from her hand, perhaps lost or broken in the melee. With her one good arm, her left hung limp, Celestine lifted something from the rubble, a fallen banner pole, still attached to the ruined Aquila standard that had once hung above the gate. She hefted this improvised lance, and with a primal scream that seemed to echo even to the priest's ears, drove it forward like a spear into the chest of the horn-helmed champion. The brute convulsed and toppled backward off the battlement, the golden Aquila impaling him as he fell. The priest's eyes burned with tears of fierce joy. "Yes, yes," he roared, startling those around him. He could not contain it. A cheer burst from his lips, and others in the command post were joining. They had seen the same sight. Celestine standing defiant amid the ruin, the heretic champion slain by her hand. Hope, as sudden and blazing as a flare, illuminated every face. "Saint Celestine!" a voice shouted from somewhere down the line, and a ragged chorus took up the cry. The priest found himself chanting her name too, voice hoarse with emotion. In that moment, Saint did not feel premature to call her. The Emperor was surely working through this warrior woman. How else could one explain what they had just witnessed? But as the echoes of triumph spread, reality interceded with cruel swiftness. Celestine's figure swayed where she stood. She staggered a step, then another, as though an unseen weight pressed upon her. The priest refocused his lenses, dread reasserting itself. He could see her more clearly now. The tattered rags were soaked red on one side, a deep wound in her abdomen pouring blood. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, likely broken. How she still stood was a wonder in itself. "No, stay up," the priest hissed under his breath, willing his strength across the distance to her. He saw Celestine turn her face upward briefly, eyes cast perhaps to the heavens or the distant spires. From the movement of her lips, she was saying something, a prayer, a final vow. Before he could guess, Celestine collapsed to her knees. One more last shot cracked out from the rubble, a panicked heretic taking a desperate parting shot. The priest saw a splash of blood as the beam caught Celestine high on the chest, just below the collarbone. She flinched, then slowly, like a marionette with cut strings, toppled sideways onto the stones. Time froze for the priest. The binoculars nearly slipped from his fingers as numb shock washed over him. His mind registered what his eyes saw. Celestine lying motionless amid the corpse-littered breach. Crimson blood pooled around her. Celestine was down. The clamor of war seemed to fade to a distant rumble in the priest's ears. He felt his heart turn leaden, as if all the hope that had soared moments ago was now plummeting into an abyss. Around him, the cheers had choked off. He heard someone mutter in dismay, "Throne, she's fallen." For an instant, despair threatened to swallow the priest whole. He wanted to scream, to curse the fates, to demand why show us a glimmer of the divine only to snatch it away? His faith quivered on the brink of fracture, but then he clenched his jaw and forced himself to breathe. The battle was not over. The Emperor's plan, inscrutable as it was, must be unfolding still. He could not lose faith now. Lord Militant Ansgar pressed the vox bead at his collar and spoke into it with calm authority. "All units, press the attack. Recover our wounded at the gate." His voice cracked slightly. "For the Emperor, do not falter." His commands were echoed by frantic acknowledgements. The second wave was already pouring into the breach under covering fire. Bolter shots and grenade blasts reverberated as power-armored sisters stormed over the rubble, engaging the disorganized heretics within. Several hospitaller medics and novices, seeing Celestine fall, broke cover and sprinted after the assault units, determined to reach the downed heroine. The priest slumped against a sandbag, suddenly feeling the weight of his years and the toll of such violent emotional whiplash. His eyes remained fixed on the distant breach. In the swirling chaos, he could barely make out forms rushing towards Celestine's fallen body. He prayed they would reach her in time, though a cold part of him whispered that she was already beyond any earthly aid. He kissed the aquila on his rosarius, tears blurring his vision. "God Emperor, if this be your will," he croaked, voice breaking into a sob, "receive her soul." The battle raged on, but in the priest's heart a battle of a different kind was fought. Hope against despair, faith against the encroaching darkness. As he stood there, blood pounding in his ears, he could only cling to the belief that miracles were possible, and that one might yet grace them, even in this bleak hour. The world devolved into a maelstrom of blood and chaos as soon as the Sister Repentia's feet hit the churned earth of no man's land. All around her, the screams of the dying mingled with the banshee shriek of incoming ordnance. She sprinted low, following in the wake of Sister Celestine, who blazed a trail ahead. Last bolts hissed past the Repentia's ears. One seared a line across her right shoulder, burning flesh and fabric. She bit back a scream. Pain was penance, pain was deserved, and charged onward. To her left, one of her fellow Repentia was caught in a burst of heavy stubber fire. The woman's torso exploded in a mist of red, and she collapsed without a sound. "Keep going," the Repentia told herself, teeth bared in a feral snarl. Wet warmth trickled down her own arm from the graze wound, but she paid it no heed. Ahead, Celestine moved like a comet of righteous fury, drawing the eye of every defender. The Repentia used that distraction, zigzagging behind a wrecked Chimera tank for a few precious seconds of cover. They were close now, only 30 or 40 paces from the base of the city walls. The ground was littered with razor wire and charred corpses. A mine went off to the Repentia's right, spraying dirt and shrapnel. Fragments peppered her legs, sharp blooms of agony, but she kept running. Adrenaline and faith coursed through her veins, numbing mortal fear. She saw Celestine reach the ragged breach caused by earlier bombardment, a pile of tumbled stones where a section of wall had partially collapsed. Celestine vaulted onto the rubble, raising her chainsword high.
"For the Emperor!"
Celestine's voice rang out over the din like a clarion. The Repentia scrambled up after her, feet slipping on the loose stone. An enemy soldier lunged at the Repentia from atop the pile. A gaunt man with wild eyes, thrusting with a bayonet. She parried clumsily, her heavy eviscerator knocking his blade aside, then body slammed into him with all her momentum. They tumbled together down the far side of the rubble heap, into the smoke-choked interior of the gatehouse courtyard. They hit the flagstones hard. The Repentia lost grip of her eviscerator, the giant blade skittering away. The heretic she'd tackled fared worse. His head struck a broken pillar with a nauseating crack. He went limp, blood pouring from a split skull. Shaking off the daze, the sister staggered to her feet, drawing the long dagger from her belt with a snarl. Shapes loomed in the swirling dust. The courtyard was a vision of hell. Sisters Repentia were everywhere, locked in brutal combat with the defenders. Here a penitent impaled on a traitor's pike, even as she gutted him with her chainsword. There 2 more hacking apart a knot of militia, heedless of the rounds that riddled their bodies in their berserk fervor. The air stank of promethium and charred flesh. Overhead, the tall gates of Eurytion loomed, half shattered by explosions, with fragments of the imperial Aquila standard hanging in tatters. The Repentia retrieved her eviscerator, wincing at the deep ache in her ribs where she had landed. As she did, a massive figure bore down on her. One of the enemy's frenzied cult zealots, a bearded giant swinging a crude flail. He howled blasphemies as he brought the spiked iron ball down. She barely leapt aside. The impact shattered the paving where she'd stood moments before. Fear flashed through her, but training and faith responded. She revved the eviscerator to life and lunged inside the man's guard before he could raise the flail again. With both hands, she drove the whirring teeth of her blade up under his ribcage. The eviscerator chewed through bone and flesh, a horrific vibration shuddering up her arms. The zealot's eyes went wide in manic ecstasy or agony, perhaps both, as blood frothed from his lips. He tried to laugh even as he died, gargling, "Skulls for—" The Repentia snarled and wrenched the eviscerator sideways, disemboweling him in a crimson cascade. The giant fell, and she yanked her weapon free, dripping viscera. Her own breaths came ragged, adrenaline fueling every motion. She allowed herself no relief or disgust. There was only the next enemy, the next blow.
"Sister!"
A voice called. Not her name, she had none now, but it was Celestine calling all the same. The Repentia whirled to see Celestine atop a mound of broken gate debris, embattled on all sides. Her Repentia garment was stained and torn, her left arm bleeding from a las burn, but she was magnificent, like a wrathful angel dealing death with each sweep of her chainsword. At her feet lay a heap of corpses, but more heretics pressed in, a ring of scarred men and women wielding axes, makeshift spears, shock prods crackling with energy. Even as the Repentia scrambled toward her, she saw Celestine impale one attacker through the heart, then cleave another who lunged from behind. The living saint. How could she not think of Celestine as such, witnessing this, fought with a grace and ferocity beyond anything the Repentia had ever known? The Repentia charged to help, eviscerator raised. "Die, blasphemers!" she screamed as she barreled into the melee around Celestine. She caught a scrawny heretic mid-swing, the teeth of her greatsword obliterating the woman's torso from shoulder to opposite hip. A spray of hot blood drenched the Repentia's face and chest. The heretic dropped in 2 severed pieces. Back to back now with Celestine, the Repentia found herself exchanging a brief glance with her. Celestine's eyes were afire with righteous fury, but also, remarkably, with gratitude.
"Stand with me, sister!"
Celestine shouted, parrying a spear thrust and kicking its wielder down. The Repentia nodded fiercely. Side by side, they carved into the enemy. The courtyard rang with the shriek of chainswords and the agonized wails of the dying. For a fleeting moment, the Repentia felt it. That state beyond fear, beyond pain. A state of holy ecstasy. She was doing it. She was fighting alongside Celestine, giving everything. The weight of her past sins seemed to lift as her eviscerator claimed another life in the Emperor's name. Every kill was an act of penance and of worship. Then came a roar, an inhuman blood-curdling bellow that cut through the din. The Repentia whirled toward the sound and saw him, a towering man in makeshift armor adorned with crude sigils, his head encased in a horned helmet fashioned from a beast's skull, the cult champion. He led a wave of howling berserkers spilling from a side passage. These new attackers crashed into the fray with insane fervor, hacking at anything in reach. The Repentia was slammed aside by a frothing woman wielding dual cleavers. She barely intercepted one blade with her eviscerator's hilt. The second cleaver connected to her thigh, biting into flesh. White-hot pain lanced up her leg. She fell to one knee, vision swimming. The cleaver woman raised her weapons for the killing blow, eyes alight with murder. A bolt pistol cracked. The cultist's face vanished in a red mist as a bolt shell took her head clean off. The Repentia gasped, following the shot's origin. A battle sister in power armor had arrived at the breach, part of the second wave reinforcement. The black-armored woman pushed forward, firing disciplined shots into the mass of heretics, her face a grim mask of vengeance. Relief and renewed determination flooded the Repentia. She forced herself upright despite her bleeding leg. All around, more armored sisters and even bulky shapes of Ogrin auxilia were pouring in, joining what remained of the Repentia. The battle raged hotter than ever, but now the Imperials had momentum. Celestine's voice rose in a fervent cry.
To me, sisters! Purge the heretics! No mercy!
The Repentia saw her still standing atop the rubble, now locked in combat with the horn-helmed champion. The brute swung a massive chain axe in brutal arcs. Celestine ducked one swing with preternatural agility, her chainsword humming as it clashed against the axe on the backswing. The two exchanged blows like heroes from a saga, the giant's strength against Celestine's speed and skill. The Repentia tried to limp closer, intent on aiding Celestine against this fearsome foe. She took one step, then another through the debris and corpses, but her injured leg buckled under her. With a frustrated cry, she stumbled, catching herself on a fallen section of iron grate. Fresh blood streamed down her thigh, and her head swam from exertion and injury. As she struggled, she watched the duel in despairing awe. Celestine landed a slash across the champion's chest, drawing a spray of blood. The horn-helmed giant bellowed in rage rather than pain, and slammed a gauntleted fist into Celestine's face, snapping her head back. Celestine recoiled, momentarily dazed. In that heartbeat, the champion kicked her savagely, a plated boot striking Celestine's midsection. The living saint, the woman who had seemed untouchable, cried out as she was launched off her feet, tumbling down the rubble slope. "No!" the Repentia screamed, agony in her voice. She crawled forward, dragging her bad leg. Her eviscerator had been lost again in the tumble. She reached for a fallen sword nearby. Any weapon, any way to reach Celestine. Celestine hit the ground hard near the base of the wall, not far from where the Repentia now clawed her way forward. The champion leapt down after her with a thundering laugh, intent on finishing his prey. Celestine tried to stand, but her injuries were taking a toll. The Repentia could see her faltering, one arm hanging limp. With a snarl of effort, the Repentia pushed to her feet. Her legs screamed in protest. She could barely put weight on it, but she would not let Celestine die undefended. She threw herself between Celestine and the onrushing champion, arms outstretched. "You shall not touch her, filth!" she spat, voice raw. The horned champion's eyes glinted behind his visor. He swung his chain axe in a murderous horizontal sweep. The Repentia raised the puny sword she'd picked up to block, but it was like trying to stop a meteor with a twig. The axe smashed into the blade, shattering it, and continued into the sister's body. Searing pain exploded through her as the teeth bit deep into her side, ripping flesh and cracking ribs. The force hurled her aside like a rag doll. She hit the ground and rolled, the sky and earth switching places in a blur. For a moment she felt nothing at all. The world was muffled, distant, as if she were underwater. She tasted copper in her mouth. When she tried to breathe, a wet gurgle came from her throat. Through dimming vision, she saw she'd been flung near the base of a statue of St. Catherine that had toppled in the fight. Its stony hand reached toward her almost pleadingly. She coughed, and hot blood bubbled on her lips. "I'm dying," she realized with strange calm. The pain began to surge back in, red and unbearable from her torso. She pressed a trembling hand to her side and felt only shredded meat and slickness where her lower ribs should be. It was a mortal wound. She knew it. Her body knew it. Blackness crept at the edges of her sight. Yet the Emperor granted her one final mercy, clarity in her last moments. She saw, with crystal focus, Sister Celestine rise once more to face the champion. Celestine's chainsword was lost, but she held the broken staff of a banner, the golden aquila still attached at its tip. The champion charged her, chain axe raised. Celestine lunged forward with a wordless cry, thrusting the makeshift spear. The aquila's sharp, spread wings punched through the horned giant's chestplate and erupted out his back. The heretic champion spasmed, impaled on the symbol of the Imperium he had forsaken. Celestine gave a righteous snarl and twisted the impalement deeper. With a choking gasp, the champion toppled backward off the rubble, sliding off the banner spear and crashing to the blood-soaked ground, lifeless. A ghost of a smile touched the Repentia's lips as she watched the brute fall. He's done. She did it. Relief and pride welled in her. Celestine had triumphed. The Emperor's justice was delivered. But Celestine herself sagged to a knee. The Repentia saw her swaying, her strength at last nearly spent. Her ragged garments were soaked carmine, riddled with bullet holes and slashes. Even from yards away, the Repentia could see the grievous wound in Celestine's abdomen pouring blood. Yet Celestine still tried to stand tall, propping herself up with the banner pole. Their eyes met. For an instant, Celestine looked at the fallen Repentia, her face streaked with soot and tears and blood, and there was such sorrow in her gaze, but also such tenderness. Celestine reached a hand toward her, as if to offer comfort or thanks across the short distance. The Repentia mustered a trembling, blood-flecked smile. "It's all right," she wanted to say. "I die redeemed." She hoped Celestine understood. Before anything could be spoken, a sharp crack echoed from above. A lasgun shot from the ramparts seared down, striking Celestine square in the upper chest. Celestine jolted, a small cry escaping her lips. The Repentia's heart wrenched as she saw fresh blood blossom on Celestine's front, just below the collar. Celestine stared down at the wound as if surprised. Then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed sideways onto the rubble-strewn ground, finally still. The Repentia sobbed, barely a breath. Agony and despair flooded her, more bitter than any pain of the flesh. She tried to crawl to Celestine, but her limbs wouldn't obey. Her strength was gone, only will remained, and even that was fading. Around them, the battle continued in a hazy roar. The second wave of sisters were securing the courtyard now, routing the last pockets of resistance. The Repentia distantly felt the tremor of a tank round exploding somewhere close, but it all seemed oddly unimportant. Her world had narrowed to the small patch of ground where she lay dying, and a few yards away, the unmoving body of Celestine, her Celestine, the savior she had given everything to follow, now lying in a pool of blood like any other mortal. Blackness encroached on the edges of her vision. She felt cold, so very cold and tired. A figure in black armor dashed past her, and she faintly recognized a hospitaller medic by the Red Cross insignia. The medic dropped to Celestine's side, frantically checking for a pulse or signs of life. More shapes gathered, voices shouting for stretchers, for apothecaries. The Repentia wanted to call out, to tell them to save Celestine, to do anything. But no sound came. Her throat filled with blood, choking her attempt at speech. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks, born of frustration and heartbreak. As her sight dimmed, she thought she glimpsed the old Thorian priest pushing through the gathering crowd, his face ashen and disbelieving. He looked like a man lost in a nightmare, clutching an aquila in white-knuckled hands. The Repentia remembered his words to her the night before. He may yet work miracles through even the lowliest of his servants. A final warmth bloomed in her chest, a tenuous spark of faith refusing to die. With her last flicker of consciousness, the Repentia fixed her gaze on Celestine's motionless form and sent a silent prayer into the void. Emperor, she is worthy. If a miracle you will, let it be now. Let it be her. Then the darkness rushed in, and the Sister Repentia knew no more. A pall of smoke and sorrow hung over the captured gatehouse as dusk approached. The battle for Eurytion's walls had been won at a staggering cost. Fires still guttered in collapsed bunkers, casting fitful light on squads of exhausted Imperial soldiers trudging through the ruins. The courtyard, so fiercely contested that morning, was now a charnel ground where Medici and surviving sisters moved among piles of bodies, seeking any flicker of life. The Thorian priest knelt beside one such body, his hands trembling as they hovered over the blood-soaked form of Sister Celestine. They had carried her here, into the shelter of a partially intact chapel antechamber just off the courtyard. Gentle candlelight played over her still face, which in repose looked younger than he expected, almost girlish but for the battle grime. "She's gone," murmured a hospitaller quietly, her voice thick with grief. She had finished cutting away the shredded remains of Celestine's garment to examine the wounds. Shrapnel lacerations, a seared hole from a lace bolt below her collarbone, deep punctures in the abdomen. Too many, too severe for any mortal to survive. The hospitaller made the sign of the aquila over Celestine's body, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Emperor, receive her soul." The priest heard the words, but some stubborn part of him refused to accept them. Not her, not after what he had seen her accomplish. His eyes burned with unshed tears as he reached out and laid a quivering hand on Celestine's cooling forehead. He silently began the litany of the fallen, but his tongue felt leaden. The words would not come. Beyond the antechamber's archway, a dozen injured sisters and soldiers lay on stretchers awaiting aid. The few medical personnel were overwhelmed, prioritizing those they could yet save. The priest dimly noted two attendants, carrying in another stretcher with a grievously wounded Repentia, the same young woman he had blessed the night before. She was deathly pale, unconscious or close to it, her side caved in by a terrible wound. They laid her not far from Celestine, shaking their heads grimly to one another. There was little hope for her either. The priest felt a fresh pang of loss. He wanted to go to the Repentia's side, to offer some final comfort, but he could scarcely tear himself from Celestine. Several sisters gathered in hushed silence around Celestine's body now. A canoness with a missing arm in a sling, two sisters superior, the hospitaller, and a handful of bloodied battle sisters. They watched with haunted eyes as the old priest gently closed Celestine's eyelids with his fingertips. Her skin beneath his touch was cooling, yet some irrational part of him expected her lashes to flutter, her eyes to open. He had prayed for a miracle. Surely the Emperor would not be so cruel as to show them such promise, only to extinguish it entirely. "We should clean her wounds," the hospitaller whispered. "Prepare her for burial." Her voice cracked on the last word. The priest drew a shuddering breath and nodded. Yes, of course. The rite of sanctification. Whatever befell, Celestine deserved to be anointed with all the honors due a martyr of the faith. Perhaps more than any soul he had ever known, she deserved that much. He retrieved a chalice of holy water and a white cloth from a makeshift altar the soldiers had set up in the chapel. Returning to Celestine's side, he dipped the cloth in the blessed water and began to wash the blood and grime from her still form. His movements were slow and reverent, almost tender, as though he were performing a sacred ritual, and indeed he was. He gently washed the blood and dirt from her limbs and face, intoning litanies of mercy through trembling lips. His vision blurred with tears of grief as he worked. As the priest cleansed Celestine's wounds, one of the sisters superior sprinkled consecrated oil and incense. The heavy fragrance of holy myrrh curled in the air, masking somewhat the coppery smell of death. The gathered sisters quietly joined in reciting the prayers, their voices blending in a soft, keening chorus. The priest moved the cloth to Celestine's face, wiping away the soot and tears from her cheeks. "Love the Emperor, for he is the salvation of mankind," he whispered, voice hitching. He realized his own cheeks were damp. Tears were finally spilling freely down his lined face. He blinked them away to continue his task, and frowned. In the flicker of candlelight, Celestine's features almost seemed to glow with a faint luminescence. Probably a trick of his tear-blurred eyes, he told himself, scrubbing at his face with the back of his hand. Yet when he looked again, that subtle glow remained beneath her skin, as if some inner light struggled to break free. "Father," the Hospitaller said uncertainly, noticing his hesitation. Before he could respond, Celestine's chest suddenly rose. A shallow, rasping inhalation rattled from her throat. The priest jolted backward in shock, nearly dropping the chalice. Gasps erupted from the others. "She lives!" one of the sisters breathed, eyes wide. Impossible. And yet the priest saw it with his own eyes. The grievous lash wound above her bosom was clearly visible, and even as they watched, the charred edges of that wound knit together by the smallest margin. New raw flesh glistened where moments ago there had been only a cauterized crater. A miracle. A true, emperor-given miracle. The priest clutched his aquila and let out a laugh that was half sob. "Throne of terror. She lives," he echoed. He leaned down over Celestine, hardly daring to hope. Her pulse, faint but present, thrummed under his fingers when he pressed them to her neck. Her eyes fluttered beneath the lids. The Hospitaller immediately bent to assist. "Easy, sister. Easy now," she whispered, as if calming a roused sleeper. In truth, Celestine was not yet awake, more like hovering on the cusp of life and death. But clearly, undeniably, life still lingered within her. "How can this be?" the canoness murmured in awe. Her one good hand made the sign of the aquila over and over, as though warding off a dream. The priest's heart surged with joyous fervor. Believe, truly believe, his own words came back to him. He had believed, and here was the answer. He turned to the onlookers, tears shining on his cheeks in the candlelight. "The Emperor is with her," he declared, voice trembling but loud. "Witness his divine will. Our Celestine is not claimed by death this day." A ripple of emotion passed through the room. Some of the sisters began to weep openly, smiles breaking on faces that had been etched in despair moments before. One battle-scarred sister let out a shout of exultation and dropped to her knees, intoning, "Emperor be praised." Caught up in the moment, the priest gently took Celestine's limp hand in both of his. It was warm. Warm. He bowed his head over it, lips moving in an earnest, choking prayer of gratitude. He had no prepared ritual for a miracle of resurrection. Who among them ever expected to need one? So he simply poured out the adulation and thanks that flooded his soul. Outside the antechamber, the commotion drew others. The wounded nearby medics, even a few of the more mobile Repentia, limped closer, peering in with disbelief as whispers spread. Celestine lives. The psychic weight of despair that had blanketed the Imperial camp since the morning began to lift, replaced by murmurs of astonished hope. As the priest and Hospitaller continued their careful ministrations, Celestine drew another breath, steadier this time. The gash in her side, cleansed of blood, revealed smooth, unblemished skin, knitting beneath congealed gore. When the Hospitaller wiped the area clean, she nearly dropped the cloth in shock. Her wounds. "They're closing on their own," she whispered. One by one, The injuries that would have slain any other human being were vanishing, as if hours or days of healing were occurring in seconds. Bruises faded, burns disappeared. Broken bones subtly realigned under skin. The assembled faithful could hardly believe their eyes. The priest certainly believed, but even so, tears of awe kept spilling as he bore witness. In all his decades of service, he had seen the Emperor's handguide events, had seen hardened souls redeemed, had even seen a few minor miracles of protection or strength. But nothing like this. This belonged in the Acts of the Saints, alongside accounts of St. Catherine or Elenius Pius, and he, a mere unnamed confessor, was privileged to see it unfold. As if sensing the thought, Celestine's eyes slowly opened. The priest inhaled sharply. Her eyes, once a warm brown, now glowed with a soft golden light that illuminated her face. She gazed upward at the vaulted ceiling in a daze. Then her shining eyes focused on the priest leaning over her. Then her lips curved into the faintest smile.
Father,
She croaked, voice weak but unmistakably hers. The priest let out a cry of pure joy. Yes, child, I am here. He squeezed her hand, unable to contain a broad grin that split his usually stern face. Around them, some sobbed openly at the sound of her voice. Celestine's gaze drifted, taking in the ring of awestruck faces around her and the state of the room. Slowly, she seemed to realize what had transpired. A frown of gentle concern creased her brow. The canoness, sensing her question, answered softly, "We lost many, Celestine. We paid dearly." Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "But you, throne of terror, you have returned to us." At that, Celestine closed her eyes again, as if in silent prayer. The golden light in her irises dimmed for a moment, then flared once more. When she reopened them, she tried to sit up. "Easy now," the hospitaller cautioned, moving to support Celestine's shoulders. But Celestine seemed to find strength beyond expectation. She rose to a sitting position, the leftover rags falling away to reveal the now unblemished skin beneath. The priest grabbed a nearby fur cloak that had been left as bedding for wounded. He draped it around Celestine's shoulders. She murmured thanks and pulled it close, covering herself. By now, perhaps 20 or 30 people had gathered at the doorway, peering at the resurrected sister in varying stages of astonishment and reverence. Whispers of living saint rippled among them. The priest gently touched Celestine's cheek, as if to assure himself she was truly there and hale. "The Emperor has work yet for you, child," he said, voice reverent and thick with emotion. "He has sent you back to us." Celestine looked into his eyes, and for a moment he felt laid bare before that radiant gaze. She simply nodded once. Then with unexpected firmness she said,
the battle is not yet finished.
It took him a heartbeat to process. She was right. They had breached the city's defenses, but not yet fully secured Eurytion. The enemy was reeling and largely broken after the gate's fall. Scattered resistance continued deeper in the city. Most notably, the renegade Cardinal Sarda's fate remained uncertain. His body had not been found among the dead. Many enemy fighters had fled into tunnels and alleys when their walls fell. You must rest, the hospitaller insisted, balking at Celestine's evident intent. You only just... But Celestine was already swinging her legs off the stretcher, rising to her feet. Gasps of alarm and wonder emanated from those watching. The priest moved to steady her, but realized it was unnecessary. Celestine stood tall, wrapping the cloak tightly around her form like a makeshift robe. Though she swayed for an instant, she closed her eyes, whispered a short prayer under her breath, and then opened them with renewed vitality. Her cheeks had color. Her stance, while perhaps a touch weary, was firm and resolute. The priest found himself stepping back in awe. In that moment, Celestine looked every inch a figure out of legend. A halo of lamplight framed her regrowing hair, and her eyes still carried a faint luminance. The gathered faithful instinctively bowed their heads, or sank to kneel as she passed her gaze over them.
We must press the attack,
Celestine said softly, yet in the stunned silence her voice carried like a bell.
Let us finish this crusade's work, in the Emperor's name.
A thunderous amen erupted from everyone present. The priest's heart soared. The despair of hours ago was utterly banished, replaced by zeal hotter than the sun. Who could doubt the Emperor's favor now? Celestine bent and picked up a fallen blade. Not her own eviscerator chainsword, which was lost in the melee, but a long, blood-stained power sword that had once belonged to an enemy officer. She tested its weight, and it crackled to life, blue sparks dancing along its edge. Turning to the priest, Celestine offered him a gentle smile that nearly stopped his heart with its compassion.
Father, will you walk with me?
She asked. He could barely find words. It would be my eternal honor, my lady, he managed, voice breaking. Together they stepped toward the doorway. The crowd parted before Celestine, many dropping to their knees in reverence as she passed. The priest heard snatches of fervent murmurings. Living saint! She's a living saint. As they emerged into the smoky twilight outside, a roar of acclaim went up from those in the courtyard and trenches who saw her. Battle-weary guardsmen threw their caps in the air. Wounded sisters struggled to stand and salute, every voice united in a sudden cry, "Saint Celestine!" The priest's eyes brimmed anew, not with sorrow this time, but with overwhelming pride and devotion. He raised his arms and bellowed to all within earshot, "Behold, the living saint returned to us. The Emperor's light is upon her. Rally to Saint Celestine." And rally they did. A surge of forces formed up behind Celestine almost immediately, those able to fight grabbing weapons and joining her, those too hurt or stunned, simply reaching out to bask in her presence. Celestine lifted the purloined power sword high, its energized blade casting a fierce blue glow.
For the Emperor!
She cried, a clarion call that cut through the smoke. For the Emperor! The echo came back from hundreds of throats, redoubled by newfound faith. They marched out from the shattered gate into the darkening streets beyond, where scattered pockets of heretic resistance remained to be purged. The night ahead would be illuminated by gunfire and burning pyres of the unfaithful. But in the priest's soul, and in the souls of all who followed, burned an inextinguishable light. He glanced back just once, toward the field hospital, where a small knot of sisters now knelt around the limp form of the brave Repentia, who had fought and died beside Celestine. He silently entrusted her soul to the Emperor. She had not lived to see this miracle with mortal eyes, but he knew in his heart she marched beside them in spirit. The city of Eurytion lay before them, scarred and smoldering, but soon it would be cleansed. With Saint Celestine leading the charge once more, fear was a stranger and doubt an impossibility. The Emperor's vengeance, incandescent and righteous, would sweep all before it. Thus did the final night of the Palatine Crusade's fiercest battle begin, with a martyr reborn in glory and an army transformed by the proof of the divine. The priest raised his voice alongside Celestine's, chanting praises into the smoke-choked air as they advanced. Hope and terror went with them, hand in hand, hope for the faithful, terror for the foe, and by dawn, only one would remain. They speak of it still, in hushed, reverent tones. The miracle at Eurytion, the martyr's dawn. In grand cathedrals on Terra and humble shrine huts on distant frontier worlds, the story is told and retold, how two brave Sister Repentia fought and died side by side, and how one rose again to become a living saint by the Emperor's grace. On nights of devotion, the faithful gather by candlelight to hear the tale. An aged priest, his voice weathered yet resonant, recounts how the battle for Eurytion raged for 2 days and nights, and how despair turned to ecstasy when Celestine, thought slain, drew breath once more amidst the carrion of war. He was there, he says, a witness among witnesses, when a golden radiance suffused her body and wounds closed as if by divine hand. And as he speaks, eyes widen and hearts catch flame with holy inspiration. Over time, stories of that day sprouted embellishments, angelic choirs in the sky, a fragrance of golden roses, even the Emperor's voice echoing on the wind. Those who stood there cannot say if such wonders are true, yet all swear they felt the God Emperor's presence when Celestine rose again. What is known for truth is this: the Palatine Crusade ended in victory. In mere hours after Celestine's return to the fray, the heretic stronghold of Eurytion was swept clean. Secessionist rebels laid down arms or were put to the sword. The apostate leader who had spurred the rebellion vanished in the tumult. Some say Celestine cut him down as he fled, others that he escaped only to meet imperial justice soon after. Regardless, the sector was reclaimed for the Imperium, but it was not Lord Militant Ansgar, or any general whom the soldiers and citizens cheered as they knelt amid the smoking ruins of the capital that dawn. It was Celestine, blood-streaked and cloaked in a humble fur, wielding a captured blade wreathed in blue flame. She stood atop the broken gatehouse and raised high the Aquila standard. A roar of devotion answered her that nearly drowned out the echoes of battle. In the aftermath, the liberated people of Eurytion began calling her the living saint, for they had seen her die and live again. Many swore they beheld a halo of pure light around her as she moved through the crowds, offering gentle words and healing touches to the wounded. The Sisters of Battle, battered and heartsick from their losses, found renewed zeal at Celestine's feet. They and the Thorian inquisitors present agreed on what their hearts already knew. A miracle had occurred, and Celestine was the Emperor's instrument. It is said that when Lord Ansgar knelt before her to give thanks, Celestine bade him rise and spoke only,
"All glory to the Emperor. I am but his sword and his servant."
That simple utterance was scratched into the margins of the campaign chronicles by awestruck scribes, a humble statement to accompany an event so profound it borders on the unbelievable. The nameless Repentia's sacrifice is seldom mentioned in grand retellings, yet some say that as she lay dying, a peaceful smile graced her lips, as if she glimpsed the Emperor's mercy. Saint Celestine went on to fight in many wars of faith across the galaxy, yet even among all her later deeds, none carry the raw, gut-wrenching power of that first resurrection at Eurytion. It stands as a parable of the ecclesiarchy, faith tested in utter darkness and rewarded beyond reckoning. Yet even now, questions linger in whispered debates and the quiet contemplations of the faithful. Why Celestine? What hand shaped her destiny from penitent sinner to living saint? Thorian scholars speculate that the Emperor's spirit burns especially bright in her, that she is a vessel of his will made flesh. Others wonder if she is one of the prophesied angeli, an angel sent by the master of mankind in humanity's darkest hours. The truth of such mysteries lies beyond the veil. Perhaps even Celestine herself does not fully know why she was chosen for such glory and burden. In her own words, recorded during a rare council with the ecclesiarch, she said,
"I will die only when he wills it, and not a moment before. Until then, let me be his light. However, unworthy.
Those words echo through the halls of the Ministorum, both humbling and inspiring all who hear them. And so the story is told again and again, a story of despair turned to hope, of sacrifice and resurrection, of the Emperor's grace made manifest amidst a field of carnage. It is recounted to bolter-wielding sisters on the eve of battle to remind them that the faithful need never despair. It is shared with novices and scholars alike to fortify their souls against the seductions of doubt. It is sung in operatic canticle for congregations numbering in the billions across the Imperium, the refrain ringing out, "Celestine fell, yet Celestine arose." In a dim corner of a distant shrine-world temple, the old Thorian priest finishes his narrative. His deep voice trails into an awed silence as candlelight flickers over rows of wide-eyed listeners. He has recounted these events 1,000 times, but even now his throat tightens at the memory. In the hush, a child's small voice pipes up, innocent, wondering, is it all true? Did St. Celestine really die and come back? The priest smiles gently, gaze distant as if beholding that sacred moment once more. He recalls the warmth that flowed from her hand, the light in her eyes like the first blaze of dawn after the longest night. He remembers how his doubt crumbled into dust upon witnessing the Emperor's power made manifest. "It is true, my child," he answers softly. "I was there and saw it with my own eyes. Saint Celestine lives by the Emperor's grace, then, now, and forever. And because of her, we know that no matter how dark the night, the Emperor's light will never die." The listeners release a collective breath as the priest intones a final benediction. Outside, beneath the eternal night sky of a distant war-torn world, the Imperium of man stands beset by horrors without end. Worlds burn, traitors scheme, and inhuman foes press on all sides. But within that temple's walls, and in countless hearts across the galaxy, the legend of Saint Celestine burns like a holy flame. In that flame flickers the promise that even in the grim darkness, faith can prevail, that from death can spring glorious resurrection. To some it is merely a story, to others proof of the divine. To all who hear and believe, it is a clarion call to stand unyielding against despair. As long as souls remember St. Celestine's sacrifice and return, the thought of surrendering to the night remains unthinkable. Thus does the myth of the living saint endure, a beacon shining through the smoke of 10,000 battlefields, beckoning the faithful ever onward toward the Emperor's light. And in that light, the unnamed priest closes his eyes and feels again the awe of standing in a ruined courtyard on Eurytion, when a saint rose radiant amid corpses and proved beyond any doubt that the God Emperor watches over his own.
I am the edge of the blade. I am the cut that ends foes. I am the wrath that topples armies. Beloved sisters, beloved brothers, will you fight with me? The chorus of the God Emperor sings in my ears. Speak the righteous words. Sing the praises. Defy the darkness. Lend me your wrath. Lend me your hate. Lend me your fire. Praise him. Praise the Emperor.
Thus ends our chronicle, Shard Walkers. The tale of sacrifice and resurrection now passes into legend, even as the eternal war rages on. But the Emperor's light endures in every soul that remembers. The scribes of our archives await your insight. Share your thoughts on this saga in the comments below, that your voice may echo among the faithful. As always, further support on Ko-fi is appreciated, not mandated. Should you wish to bolster our crusade, you will find the link in the archives below. We honor your dedication in listening. Stand ready and subscribe if you have not already done so. So you are prepared when next we gather to unveil another fragment of this grim darkness. Until the Emperor brings us together again, may his light guide you through the darkness. The Emperor protect.